we're going to have actually, and I will repeat it, our fourth webinar of the year. And the name is Podcasts as a Platform for Building Community and Facilitating Access to Knowledge. And I'm sure many people will be interested in this because podcasts are something that we're using a lot now in pandemic times. Maybe at the beginning it was more like recreational, right? But now many teachers are actually using it as a teaching tool, probably. So there you go. Many people are joining. Thank you for joining us. And maybe we will begin. Let's remember the following things. I'd like to remind everybody that we're going on Facebook Live right now, so you can join us there, or you can just look for the link in case you want to join our Zoom meeting right now. You can join anytime. You can leave your comments and questions about this on the chat, and we will be reading them to Daniel and Jose Luis, our presenters today. And you can do exactly the same on Facebook because we will be checking Facebook as well, right? So if you are joining us on Facebook Live, just feel free to join in the conversation anywhere you want. Plus, we're recording this, so as usual, we will be posting these webinars recording in case you missed it. You will have the chance to catch it on YouTube, our YouTube channel. So yeah, that's it, pretty much it. So I will leave you with Carla Palma, our TESOL Chile Vice President for this period, and she will carry on with the presentation. Thank you, guys.
Hello, everyone. Well, I have the super enjoyable task of presenting our super kind presenters this day. The first one to be presented is Daniel Wim. Daniel Wim has been involved in English language teaching in Chile since 2010. He earned his BA in Spanish and German teaching credentials and MA from Occidental College. His teaching experience in the United States involves teaching in public elementary and high schools in California and New Jersey. Daniel has worked in schools, universities, and institutes in Santiago and currently teaches freelance. In addition to presenting at in-person and online conferences such as TESOL Chile, TESOL Chile, Rilo Los Andes, and TESOL, he offers professional development workshops and is one half of the ELT in Chile podcast. So now I'm presenting the other half of ELT in Chile podcast, who is Jose Luis. Jose Luis Poblete is an adjunct professor at the Universidad de Santiago de Chile. He holds an MA in English Linguistics and Literature and a BA in TEFL. His research interests include the relationship between accent and identity, the use of corpora in the EFL classroom, and language learning in translator education. So being this said, I leave the floor to you guys to amaze us today with this super interesting topic.
Thank you very much for your introduction and, of course, for the invitation, right? And we're super glad to be here.
Yes, thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Carla. Thank you, TESOL Chile, for this opportunity.
Yeah, and like Barbara said, thank you very much for being here on a Friday.
Yes. So with our presentation, we'd like to give a quick overview of what we'd be talking about. First off, we're pretty sure everyone knows, but in case you don't, what exactly is a podcast? We're going to talk a little bit about our prior experience before we started the podcast, and then how we started everything, our mission, what our experience has been like, building a community, what we've learned, some information from previous episodes, and then we will open the floor for questions.
Absolutely. So Dana, what's a podcast? So a podcast, you can see it from different perspectives. For some people, it can be, I've seen many examples, like a complete radio program. It can be, maybe an extract or highlights from a program, or it can be, completely unique content, with a particular theme. In this case, it can be specific, to music, to books, in this case, teaching. Let's say people can subscribe to this, and this can also be listened to as a series or, separately. And we need to understand that not every radio program available online, let's say it's not a podcast. Sometimes they can just be, let's say, some parts, or it can be an interview, let's say, or just some sections. So that's why it can be a definition of a podcast.
Yeah, and I mean, but the way that I think of it, when I talk with people that are very technologically savvy, I tell them it's kind of like a radio show. that's online that you can listen to at any time.
Yes.
Excellent, excellent. So what is our prior experience with podcasts? Because they've actually been around for a while. So Jose Luis.
Yes, I'm going to talk about my experience with podcasts, like the way I found out about them and also the way, I was thinking about doing something like this. So the first one is called Serial. It's about, it was kind of like a show. So you had to listen to an episode and there is also a website so you can follow some clues for the next episodes. So it's like a mixture of both things. So if you want to check it out, it's super cool. So it's like, they give you instructions how to follow things on the website. So you have to do both, listen and also interact. So that will be one. Let's say one of my experiences. Another one, it's one called Because Language. So of course, they talk about language and linguistics since we all, let's say, teach English. And of course, we're passionate about language teaching and let's say learning. They talk about, let's say, accents. They talk about, let's say, sometimes just two words, so they do research. So that's something I also do. So that's why I enjoy listening to this podcast. And there's another one. I'm a big fan of music. So in this case, this one's called Microphone Check. So they talk about rap and hip hop. So here they talk to the artists. So sometimes it's super cool to hear, how they start creating, how they started, writing music and things like that. So let's say with these three, I would say I'm like, they sound super interesting. So it would be a really good idea to start one. But for that, we have to go through, and we're going to talk about that with Daniel, how we started. So Daniel, what about your experience with podcasts?
So in my case, when I thought about this, the first thing I thought about was my iPod Nano that I got probably back, I think this was like 2010, 2011. And I would have this in my pocket and I would listen, on the bus, on the subway, and so that was probably my first experience with podcasts. One that I really liked is Planet Money. And so this would take topics, current events, and things related to the economy, but it would talk about it in a really interesting way so that anyone that doesn't have a background in economics could understand. So this is something that I listened to myself for my own personal enjoyment. And then one thing that I actually started doing was I went back and I listened and I said, wait, this would be really interesting for my students that are at like an upper intermediate advanced level. So what I actually started doing was I started going back and then creating listening guides and then using these in classes. So that was kind of how I started getting interested in podcasts. I also listened to This American Life for a little bit. This is quite longer. And so I think that this was a bit challenging to listen to, like in one trip on the bus or one trip on the subway, because it was so long. Happier with Gretchen Rubin is one of my favorite podcasts that I still listen to. And then I did also listen to the Savage Love podcast with Dan Savage. I don't really listen anymore, but he has some pretty interesting opinions and takes on things. And then Freakonomics. Also, kind of like Planet Money, it really takes an interesting look at things. You think about things maybe in a way that you haven't thought of. And Planet Money and Freakonomics, I find them particularly interesting because they will interview non-native speakers of English, speaking in English. So you're hearing people with another accent, you're hearing people that aren't necessarily speaking correct English, and so I find that really interesting. And I think that that's something that is really beneficial for students also to see. So moving on, how did all of this start?
Yeah. So, like I said before, we had this idea after listening to many podcasts, and then when I met Daniel, we had this conversation, and of course, I didn't want to do this by myself, right? So I had a conversation with Daniel, so I said like, hey, I have this idea, so would you be interested in participating? And then, do you remember what you said, Daniel? And then
I said
about
that would spark some joy. Yes, let's do it.
Yeah.
And this was, I was trying to look back to looking at emails and messages from WhatsApp. I can't find the exact date when we talked, but it was sometime in May or June 2019.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. So, yeah. And then, of course, yeah, it was just like we had to think about some technical stuff. I had, we had some friends for some people looking for some inspiration, talking about, the format. So, and actually, yeah, we did some research. We read a lot. And I remember that I bought some book. I mean, I think I bought a book, like related to, podcasting. And, so we decided so we said, okay, let's do it. So that's when we started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And so I think that this is the thing. Because this isn't something, you just, decide one day you're going to do it. And then, the next day you start. we talked for about 4, 5, 6 months before we had everything officially launched. And I remember that we were actually at the TESOL Chile conference at I think it was at Universidad Diego Portales.
Yes.
And TESOL Chile allowed us to get up, present what we were working on at that time. And I believe that was in November 2019. So this was prior to launching our first episode, so that was almost 2 years ago. And so then we made it to our 1-year anniversary, December 1st.
Yeah, of course. That was episode 24. So, that's how things, started. But let's say there is a lot of work behind something like this. Probably, people from TESOL, let's say, understand that. Like there is a lot of work, preparing anything, a webinar or something like that. So, and I think that's what we're going to be talking about, right, Daniel? The next part.
Definitely. Yeah. And so now at this point, we're up to 34 episodes now, and I think that looking back, it doesn't sound like that much, but I think the amount of work that goes into it, like when we've gone back and we've looked at our Google Docs with our scripts, I'm like, that script was 20 pages long. Yes. And, I'm realizing that we have actually done a lot with this. So, yeah. So, we started out with the idea, we talked, we collaborated, and, we made it happen. And so what was our mission with this? So we think that, there are plenty of great opportunities out there. There are conferences, there are workshops and things like that. But I think particularly in Chile, you have the challenge of where do you host a conference? Things like that, because Santiago is a central place, but people that are in regions, it might be a little bit difficult for them to get off of work. Traveling to Santiago can be a bit of a barrier, and so that makes it difficult for those people that do want to improve their teaching. So we wanted to share knowledge, share our experience, and also free and practical resources.
Yeah, I think, yeah, absolutely. Like the idea, it's always, to try to share free practical resources, things that we have used or things that, that some people, let's say, recommend, but, there is always something you say, Daniel, is like, there are too many webinars and also there are too many events and there are too many tools. There are so many, and like, it's difficult to decide, okay, I'm going to be trying this. So we usually try to, to share the tools that we usually use or that the ones that we have used in class. So, not to just share anything, let's say, without having used it,
Definitely. And I think the other thing is that we made a very, very conscious decision to not have sponsors, to not have commercials and things like that. So we're not, like advertising anything and getting any type of income from it. So we're not being, influenced by any type of commercial interest.
Yeah.
And I think that's one thing that we wanted to make, very clear also, and that we wanted to stick to. So then, we were doing our podcast. Well, we were starting the podcast, and we were starting our planning. And then the Estadio Social, the social uprising, happened October 2019, about 2 months before we launched, so then, we kind of had some conversations about that. Then, I guess we were about 4 or 5 months in, and then a little thing called COVID came along. So, we had these set ideas, we were going to be recording in person and have guests and everything. And I think our last episode that we have recorded to date in person was, I think, in March 2020.
Yeah. Yes.
And so we had this big shift from, like just teaching in Chile to now, okay, we're in this pandemic. Everyone's online now.
So yeah, I mean, that was, let's say, a challenge as well. But, we also had to accommodate to that and try to find, some solutions. So that's why we decided to, let's say, keep recording actually, and, to try to find some tools and try to teach in that emergency situation, try to add some tools, try to see what everybody was doing. And that's why, that was also, one of the main goals, try to respond to this pandemic and share resources, of course.
Definitely, because we are all in this together. So if we can help other people, we can, share things and help out as a community. I think that's important.
Yeah.
So now our experience. So Jose Luis, why don't you go ahead and start talking about this?
So I don't know if you want to share, let's say, the our picture there. So the first one, yeah,
Ah,
right
there we go. Yes.
there.
Uh,
Yeah, so this is let's Daniel Carlos, one of my friends who happens to be a sound engineer, who works with, let's say, also with making movies. So that's one of, let's say, I think that was probably one of the last episodes we recorded, together, because after that, this was in March, I think, or maybe in summer. Um,
this was in summer. I believe this
yeah,
was in January because I
yeah,
remember we were at your apartment. And
yes.
then I believe when we recorded in March, I believe we
Uh,
recorded at
in
your
your place,
house.
yes. So yeah, so let's say, of course, in this experience we needed to, let's say, we needed some help, because lots of people think it's just, let's say, us, and recording, press and record, and magic happens. No, we needed some help, and actually, yeah, that's one of my best friends there, so Carlos helped us, absolutely. And of course you can see Daniel and wearing our summer clothes, absolutely.
Yeah. At that time, we did not have our shirts.
Yeah, now we do,
I,
now we do.
yes. And I think one thing that happened also was we really had to pay attention to the acoustics
Yes.
of where we were. And I really had no idea about how important that was with making sure that the sound around you was being absorbed by rugs, by clothing, books, things like that. Because if there's too much of an echo, apparently that makes it incredibly difficult to go
Yes.
ahead and to edit the audio, also balancing, the voices so that they appear, pretty much at the same level. So yeah, and I remember that in this, so we recorded and then we went out to get Peruvian food. And then right after you closed your door, you realized that you had locked your keys inside.
Yes. So I remember, I will never forget that. So yeah, I had to
Uh,
call my dad to let's open the door again after like 2 hours. So yeah, let's say here we
yeah,
have some people, and also I think we have, I think there's another picture. Yes. So yeah, if you
yes.
wanted to. So what happened here, Daniel?
So this was during the pandemic. And I don't know if you can see in this picture here, I have like a little water bottle. And this is supposed to be a water bottle that does not drip any water. Well, let's just say it didn't work out that way. So I was drinking some water when I was teaching a class, and a few drops of water fell onto my laptop in the keys. And then the bottom row of keys stopped working. And this was in the middle of the pandemic when you had to get permits to go out, where things were really shut down. So I had to go onto Mercado Libre and place an order to get a separate keyboard that I could plug in with a USB cable. So I had this like monster setup for I think about 5 months before I was able to get a new computer. And this was my setup, with having the big keyboard there, then having the computer. You can see the microphone off to the side. So I can definitely say I do not miss that setup.
Very good, very good. And I think there is also one more picture. Yeah, it was, let's say, that's usually like it's the setup, let's say, of how things work. In terms of, recording the software that we use. I mean, we have a script. Also, there is also space to improvise, but that was basically usually, I mean, also the way that we usually work. That that's
Mhm.
how we record. And let's say we have to see each other and things like that.
Yeah, and so we were using Audacity as the audio software with recording, and we had to check settings with that also. I didn't always understand everything. So, someone would have to help me out with changing the settings and things like that, you
Yeah,
know. And Spanish is not my first language. So, we'd be communicating English, Spanish, and we would just make it work. So,
yeah,
yeah, so
absolutely.
those are some of our experiences with what's happened. And so now, those of you that know me know that I'm gringo. You probably know that I am very, very structured and very organized. And so I think one thing that's really important when you have a podcast is having a structure, having a format. And so I think Jose Luis and I, we are quite different people. We have different personalities, different strengths. I think this is where one of my strengths came into play.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I mean, in terms of, let's say, format, and also, let's say, yeah, we had to really think about how we were going to structure this. So there was an introduction, right? There was also, we talked about what's happening in our countries, because, yeah, I mean, things, were happening every week, like with this pandemic. And also, let's say, in terms of, how the semester was going, we also had to try this in class tip, like Daniel would come up with an idea, or sometimes myself, there was also a main topic. So today, on this episode, we're going to talk about this. Also, we had the option of sharing a teaching gold star, teaching demerit when bad things happen, and also good things happen, right? And of course, yeah, a conclusion, and also to for us, to think about stuff and also to share or have, let's say, some conversation, let's say, with ourselves, or any recommendation or things like that, right, Daniel? I don't know if you'd like to add anything else.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that this is the thing. I think that there may be some people that when they have a podcast, they stick exactly with the topic and they maybe just keep it, very, very focused in that way. I think that there was just so much that was happening in Chile and the United States
Yeah.
that I thought it was kind of nice to talk about what was happening. I mean, if you look, the Estadio Social, the social uprising, we had the pandemic, we had George Floyd. There was so much happening that I felt like we really had to talk about those things and give them some context, and I think that's going to be kind of nice to go back and listen to. And, remember, okay, so that's what things were like at that point.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So yeah, we tried to keep this, format pretty steady. Sometimes I think that just morale was so low, and I think everyone's mental health wasn't exactly in the best of places. So we didn't really focus on any teaching demerits. We were just glad that we, put on pants and got out of bed some days.
Yeah.
I think, we can all relate to that in one way or another.
Yes. So
The
yeah,
platforms.
yes. So the platforms here. So this was, let's say, a challenge as well, because of course, let's say, wanting to just have a platform, and there are so many. So I mean, when we received some help, and we're going to talk about the team of people who have been helping us, suggestions and ideas, of course. Yeah, so we decided to create a YouTube channel, of course. There is also LinkedIn, and of course, managing them requires time, right? And also, let's say, Instagram as well. We've got Facebook, and the main one, Spotify, because everything, let's say, it's based there. But you need to, for example, if you would like to publish on Spotify, you need to fulfill with some, let's say, some requirements. So it's not just posting anything you want. So you have to explain what you're going to be doing. You need to have a name, a link, and there's a website. So it's, let's say, it takes time. So that's why, let's say, here we received some really valuable help. But as you may know, let's say, people at TESOL or anybody who uses social media, sometimes, let's say, using Instagram and LinkedIn, that requires a lot of work. So, and let's say here we had to post the things that we were doing, or some of the plans. Every time we launched a new episode, we had to, let's say, post things and updates. So let's say, having platforms is super cool, but it also requires time, right, Daniel?
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, I think this is the thing, I felt like maintaining, things like Instagram, Facebook, it almost felt like kind of like a part-time job.
Yep.
And I do have to say, I think that this is an area where maybe I didn't do the best of jobs with keeping things updated on Facebook, but I think that just managing so much on our own, we're doing the best that we can. Of course, we're our own worst critic. So we do need to cut ourselves some slack, and focus on the things that we are doing well.
And also, as you may know, there's a job, social media manager or whatever, community manager, just let's say people who work, let's say, in this area 24/7. So let's say, imagine that's something that we can do. But having the platform, of course, is very important.
Definitely.
And of course, we have a website, right, Daniel?
We do, yes.
So, and let's say this is a website that was redesigned because the first version was, let's say, well, it was cool, but we wanted something more user friendly. So if you have the chance, let's say, to check it out, and also Daniel's going to explain a few things related to the website. But we have somebody who's really talented helping us, in the design. Try to keep it minimalistic, simple, but also functional, so that those are, let's say, the main conditions for a website to work.
Definitely, yeah. And I mean, it's pretty straightforward. That we had the home, then we'd have an episodes page, and then we would have the list of the episodes with the show notes. You could listen right on the website, an about page about each of us, contact, and then we have our links to the YouTube channel, to LinkedIn. So this worked out really nicely to have kind of like a central location for everything.
Yeah, and you can just also go to Spotify if you want.
Right, exactly, right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And so then the team.
Yeah. So here, let's say, I mean, this is also, let's say, like I would say, a beautiful thing about, let's say, building community, because lots of people think, and also this happens, let's say, in movies, or when we're watching TV or a TV series, we think that things just happen, but we need people, let's say, to work together and also help us. So let's say, here we have our let's say the guy who created our website and everything. Of course, he's wearing a suit because he's super professional, Nicolas Roman. So Nico is super talented and super, let's say, is very good at technology and managing technology and doing that, posting things. Then we have Andres Ranz, who's from Mexico. He's wearing his Puebla jersey and he designed our logo. So he's a graphic designer. And here, let's say, in a way, like Daniel knows Nico, knows Matias, knows Carlos and Jason. He hasn't met Andres, but uh, this is like this been a beautiful project, let's say, in that sense, because I know Matias and I knew when he graduated as an audio engineer. So this is one of his first jobs and he's done a super, let's say, good job, of course. And then we have Carlos, who's one of my friends, and Jason, who also, let's say, works as a sound engineer. So, this is one part of the team, of course.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah. And I think that this is the thing, it's so nice looking back at this picture because this was probably in November 2019.
Yeah.
The picture of the four of us together, in my apartment when we recorded that first time. And Matthias, I've never met him in person. Nico, I've seen him on video calls, but I've never met him in person. Same with Andres, So I think that this is the beauty of technology and, the ability that we can be connected even if we can't, connect in person.
Absolutely. But yeah, there is let's say, an important team, let's say, of people behind this project.
Yeah.
So that's also, let's say, important to acknowledge and recognize.
Exactly. Yeah. And so talking about building a community. So one thing that we wanted to do was, well, we recognize that obviously we are both men. So we can provide a perspective. Jose Luis can provide a perspective as a non-native speaker of English. I can provide a native speaker perspective of things. And the other thing is I can provide the perspective of being a foreigner in Chile, but we are only two people. So one thing we really wanted to do was get more perspectives.
Absolutely.
And so one of our first guests was Tina. And so she was able to talk about being African-American, teaching English in Chile. And I think that that was very, very relevant with what's happened with George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, and everything in the United States. And then we had Sandra Morales.
Sandra Morales, who talked about technology, let's say the use of, let's say, I think this was one of maybe the beginning of the emergency situation. So we were trying to find, resources, how people were, let's say, reacting to this, using WhatsApp or using, I don't know, besides Zoom, Microsoft Teams and Google Meet, using Discord or any platform. Anybody was like willing to share whatever they were doing, or whatever tool they were using.
Definitely, yeah. And then we also heard from Carlos Veloso, and it was so interesting hearing about translation and teaching translation in the Chilean university system.
Absolutely. And then, we talked, let's say, to Jorge, well, sadly, let's say he had to go back to China. So he was trapped here in Chile because he was working in China. So let's say when we talked to him, he was still here in Chile, trying to go back to China, but let's say that was his main job. But he was teaching, let's say, online with, I don't know, a 12-hour difference. So imagine how that was for him. So he shared his experience with us in that context.
Yeah. And then we had Sophia and Erica talking about using literature and teaching English. And I think that it was really interesting because I think when a person just hears literature, at least for me, I typically think of like novels and things like that. But there's short stories, there's poems, there's so much more to it than I think people realize.
Absolutely. And then we talked to, let's say, with Barbara. So Barbara is here. So it was a super cool interview where she talked about social emotional skills, your experience teaching. And also, let's say, well, we actually asked everybody, that's also, let's say, an interesting question, how they got involved, let's say, with learning, and also how they learned English if English is not their first language. So we've got, let's say, like a really interesting, let's say, idea, like how, let's say, we became teachers, basically.
Definitely, definitely. And I think that the socio-emotional skills, I think that is so relevant to the situation now with the pandemic, teaching online, kids being in front of the screen, dealing with, issues at home, and with everything that's happening, we really need to make sure the kids are okay emotionally and socially if we want them to do well in school. And then our most recent interview was with Tom Kittle. And I think this works out kind of nicely because it was at a workshop that Tom Kittle gave where the two of us met back in, I think it was 2017.
Yes. Yeah. So of course, Tom had the experience of working here in Chile. So when we said that we wanted to interview him. Everybody has been, really cool, accepting our invitation. So everybody has been super, let's say, supportive and being willing to, let's say, share what they've done, because we've got so many different experiences. And that's, let's say, one of the main missions, like we said at the beginning, like not only, sharing, also giving a platform for people to share what they do. And that's what, let's say, what we would like to continue doing. This is a platform for teachers of English. And also we've realized that, once we start interviewing people, that basically we're all facing the same issues,
Mhm.
regardless, let's say, of their teaching context or setting.
Definitely, definitely. So this is one way that we were building community. So now we did have social media. So this was a little bit of a challenge to keep up with. But as you see here, we had 53 posts, 183 followers, 104 people following on Spotify, 2,640 plays. And we have listeners from Chile, the United States, they're the main two countries, Germany, the UK, Japan, Dominican Republic, France, and Brazil.
And there is also actually, let's say, a longer list, because we didn't want to include them all, because we had to, let's say, scroll down. But we also have people from, let's say, Nepal listening to the podcast, from Iran. So that's super cool. But, this is also, let's say, the beauty of, let's say, sharing things online, because even though, like, let's say, our audience, and also this is something that Daniel and I have realized, that audiences, let's say, can be anywhere. So let's say, actually, and then we started seeing that, like I said before, everybody was going through the same challenges, experiencing the same challenges or struggles, let's say, everywhere around the world. So
Mhm. Yeah. So I think that we're not alone by any stretch of the imagination. And I think that
yeah,
this really was something that kind of helped bring people together.
yeah.
And so then what we've learned.
So Daniel, would you like to start, or do you want me to go first?
Why don't you go ahead and start?
Okay, so I think, well, this has been a really beautiful project. Of course, let's say, now that we've been working with Daniel, let's say, well, on many different topics, and we've talked about teaching. And also, I would say, let's say, one part would be like that: if you want to do something, if you want to make a change, let's say, or let's say, trying to help people, you really need to show what we, let's say, show what we do, basically. And also, that's something that we're going to be discussing, because we had to, let's say, in a way, when we edit it, listen to our own voices, and that can be a really, at the beginning, a little bit uncomfortable. Nobody likes to listen to their own voices. And of course, and also, something that we've learned is, like, of course, doing stuff that's better than not doing things. And also, that everybody can contribute to this, but because we have different skills, right, Daniel? So I'm more of
Mhm.
a technological guy. I really like technology. Daniel was like, I mean, I like sound and microphones, so that's why my friends are audio engineers and sound engineers. When Daniel was like, we had to talk about many things. So I think not only doing things, but trying to do things well, I would say that's one of the main things I would
Mhm.
like to say. What about you, Daniel?
I think that this is something where I moved outside my comfort zone a little bit. I think that also, yeah, learning a new set of skills. And I think that this is something too where sometimes where we'd be talking about the audio settings and the video settings, and I would have to say, okay, I understand the words that you're saying, but I have no idea how to do that. Please explain this to me like I'm 5 years old. And I really had to, explain, like that I don't have that expertise. And I think that this worked out also very, very nicely, bringing our two personalities and our two skill sets together.
Yeah, yeah.
Because I think that obviously, with Jose Luis being Chilean, you understand Chilean culture, you understand communication. And so that's something that I've learned. But every once in a while, I still make a mistake, or there's maybe some type of thing that's understood in the culture
Yeah,
that I didn't know about.
yeah.
And so I think that also, Jose Luis, you're very, very good about talking in social situations, getting to know people. Whereas for me, like I feel maybe a little bit nervous, a little bit anxious. I don't know what to talk about with people.
Yeah.
Um, but at the same time, I am very structured. I am very organized, and I think that lends itself well to, keeping things on track, keeping things on track, keeping things organized with some type of structure.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely. And also, let's say, like I said before, this is a project, let's say from us, in a way, from Daniel and myself, to share with people, of course, but that also made us, let's say, do research, and that's also like
Mm,
checking stuff, or we had to read some papers. So let's say, and also we're going to share, let's say, a few things with you, but basically that's what we learned, that that this is something that we, let's say, took seriously. Of course, it's super fun, to do, but it requires time and it requires effort. It requires a conscious effort, let's say, of saying, okay, so we would like to talk about this. How are we going to address these issues, because there are so many that we can talk about.
Yeah, and I think that this is one thing that so in Jose Luis's case, he teaches at a university, so he has collaboration that happens with colleagues. In my case, I'm teaching freelance, so I'm kind of like what they say is a solopreneur. And so in that case, I could just, like stay in my little bubble and just teach my classes and not really socialize, not really talk with other teachers. And I think that's a very easy pattern for people working freelance to fall into. So by doing this, I was thinking, yeah, I should be reading research. I should be, reading these books and, having conversations with people. And I think that that was one thing, that has been very beneficial for me to make sure I'm still staying informed, I'm still staying updated, with what's happening with English language teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. Very good. And yeah, so this is, let's say, an important point. I think Daniel is going to talk about, let's say, what the picture is trying to say.
Yes. So here is a screenshot from the website. And we see this is from episode 19, Teaching Pronunciation Online. So we talk about how we want to have these free and practical resources available for people. So what we do is we obviously talk about them in the episode, and then we have show notes. And this has direct links to the resources that we talk about. So here we see that we have the Sounds, which is a pronunciation app that you can use on your phone, the American English pronunciation app. I know Jose Luis really likes using Youglish, which goes ahead and it shows the pronunciation of a particular word in various forms of media. There was a really, really good YouTube video. I believe it was either a webinar or an in-person seminar with Adrian Underhill, and then a podcast about languages and the people who speak them called Subtitle. So all these things that we talk about, we make it readily available on the website under the show notes. And I think that this is one thing that is really valuable for people. So we've also published, as we said, 34 episodes. So here are some of the topics we talked about. Jose Luis, can you tell us about them?
Of course, yeah, we've got building classroom community. And I think here, that's one of the, I would say, one of the most important episodes. I think it's one of the first ones as well, because we, let's say, we want how, let's say, we do this in different contexts. Like Daniel said, I teach at a university, I also teach freelance. But of course, it was interesting to see how we do this in different ways, like Daniel working, let's say, as a freelance teacher, and me doing, let's say, with a group of people. So here, of course, this was one of the main goals, like finding, a topic and building around it. So let's say this was one of the most important ones.
Definitely. Yeah, and I think that another thing that was really important, and so this was something that I felt quite strongly about with managing your self-care as a teacher. And so we actually published this before the pandemic happened.
Yeah.
So I think, just really paying attention to your boundaries, really paying attention to how you're taking care of yourself, there's really a lot to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, yeah, of course, cultural differences. I mean, yeah, we talked about, let's say, our experiences living in other countries, because we both had the chance of, let's say, doing that. And of course, and also, let's say, teaching in Chile, which is, let's say, very important, and how to understand how things work here in Chile. And also Daniel talking about his experience in teaching here for more than 10 years, I would say.
Yeah. And I think this is the thing, because there are some things that you just don't know to expect when you go to another culture, and so I remember that was a really enjoyable episode. Using textbooks in classes.
Or not
so
using
back
textbooks
in the time,
in classes. Yeah.
Exactly. Back in the time when we actually used physical textbooks, and back in the time when we would actually meet our students in person.
Yeah.
Yeah,
absolutely. And then, of course, the big moment, teaching online. Yeah. Teaching online.
That has been a recurring issue, with the pandemic and everything, so we have multiple episodes about that.
Yeah, racism and the power of language there. Well, let's say I think we when we interviewed, I think it was like around the, or the time we interviewed Tina. So when we talked about this, we talked about, let's say, some books, and also how to keep ourselves informed, and this is something that it's also important, being teachers, like the way we have to talk to our students about, let's say, certain topics or certain issues, and of course
Yeah.
how to do that from an informed, perspective.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that this was around the time of George Floyd's murder. So I think that so many people all over the world were talking about this. Black Lives Matter. Everyone's talking about it. And I think that one thing that we did talk about also was how pervasive some of this language is, and how it's normalized. The idea of a master bedroom. When you're looking to buy a house, that master bedroom goes back to slavery, when you had masters and then you had the slaves, and we still have that language, which is, completely normal in the United States. So what I have heard they are making changes. They're talking about the principal bedroom or the main bedroom now.
Yeah.
But there's so much about language that I think we don't realize.
And of course, teaching international exams, which is, a recurrent topic as well. People want to study abroad, taking either IELTS or TOEFL, or any other exam if you would like to study abroad. So yeah, and also because we've had the experience of doing that, myself and also Daniel, of course, and many people now, because many people would like to study abroad. So that's also, let's say, an important topic where we share tips, we share resources. So that's why, let's say, like Daniel said, it's always important, like if you would like to check an episode, also to check our show notes, because that's where we share the websites, the papers, let's say, documents and pictures.
Definitely. And one of our most recent topics was learner autonomy, and how do we get our students to be autonomous learners? How do we get them practicing on their own? How do we get them to the point where they take complete responsibility for their learning? And because we can't be there for them every single day.
Yeah. So I don't know if yes, before we close, I don't know if you have any questions for us, and also, of course, we have some closing words and how to use our website and some recommendations. Yeah, but I don't know, Carla or Barbara, if you see any questions or.
Hello, guys. I'd like to invite you maybe to check some of the comments in the chat more than questions.
Sure.
We do have comments and some people thanking you guys for sharing this. I think it has been really inspiring. I myself have a couple of questions, but I'd like to open up this space and this time. So if you guys who are participating with us here on Zoom, or if you're watching us on Facebook, if you have a question or a comment, feel free to write it down. Or maybe you prefer, in the spirit of a podcast, just to open up your mic maybe and participate and let the guys know what you think. So maybe we can give a minute in case someone would like to join in the conversation. Feel free to do so, and we'll be reading you.
Hello. I do have a question.
Yes, please.
Okay.
You hear me?
Yes.
All right. Well, first off, congratulations on what you're doing. I think it's a great job, and it's got so much potential. So I'm sure that you have a lot of ideas and plans to come. So it's great. Now, I came in a little late, but still have this question based on your experience. What do you think is the most optimal situation if we're creating a podcast? Meaning, if you have one guest or two guests, I'm thinking in terms of, well, it's two of you, for example, interacting with somebody, and then you're completely in control, I'd say. But then if you have two people, two guests, then you have more ideas to work with, to people. But then I'm sure it's a little more challenging when it comes to interaction and turn taking and all that. So what's the optimal for you, to have one or two guests, for example?
Would you like to answer that, Benny, first, or do you want me
that is a really good question. I haven't really thought about it too much, but the way that we set things up is that when we've talked with a guest, we would go ahead, have an initial conversation, show them the questions we're planning on asking. So then that way we would kind of have, a structure, a format to follow. Of course, we could then ask additional questions. I think when you do have two guests, that is interesting because you do have, additional perspective. As you said, I think it does get a little bit challenging with the turn taking. and things like that. I guess it depends how structured you want things to be, or if you just want to leave it as an open conversation. I don't know. What are your thoughts, Jose Luis?
Well, I would say that that's a very good question. I would say, well, things are more a little, I would say, more complicated online because there is no, like it's hard to see other people's, gestures, and you have to look at the, let's say, maybe the questions or maybe doing this. But let's say, in my opinion, well, that's why, like, well, let's say in your question, you say like we're in control. That's true. So let's say it's also important that, let's say, you direct the question. So for example, that's something I usually try to do, or Daniel as well. It's like, okay, so Daniel, what do you think? Or for example, Barbara, what would you like to say about that? So let's say it's important to try to keep that in control. Or sometimes, let's say, people just give each other, let's say, the chance to just speak. And also I think, well, we're all teachers, so let's say we know when somebody, let's say, would like to say something or is waiting, to say something. We have to be really aware of that. But I would say, let's say, having one guest, of course, is less challenging than having, let's say, two, because it would be like, four people talking at the same time or trying to speak. So that's why there must be one person, in this case, Daniel or myself, trying to control that and saying, oh, so would you like to say something, Barbara? Or let's say, Carla, would you like to say something? Or Daniel, what would you like to say about that? So, and then that's something that you learn with practice, probably at the beginning, first episode, we didn't do that very well, but now then we started learning, and I think now, and we feel much more confidence in, let's say, episode 35 or let's say 34, sorry.
Definitely, yeah. And I think one thing too to keep in mind, if you are coordinating with more people, when you add a fourth, or the more people you add, the more schedules you need to coordinate with.
Yeah.
The more people you have to coordinate audio with. And so I think that you have those logistics that you also need to keep in mind.
And I guess also you need to make sure that you have a balance of the speaking time, because I'm sure there are people who are going to be more talkative than others.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you for your
Thank
question.
you. Thank you.
Are there any other questions and anyone else that would like to jump in or comment? Because in the meantime, maybe I could comment. Yes, who's there?
Margarita.
There you go, Margarita, go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for this conference that you are doing to all of the English teachers. Although I am not working at the moment, I am practically retired because I haven't been teaching all my life. No, I was a bilingual secretary. Then when I retired, being a secretary, I decided to study at the university. And then I work, before studying, I work as an English volunteer teacher to a school with handicapped children. And that was a great experience for me. So that made me be involved in preparing more about the language. So what I would like to know is how long did you spend in structuring this podcast, and how much money did you invest to create this podcast? Thank you so much, and it's a pleasure to have known all of you and your work in Chile.
Thank you very much
Thank
for
you.
the question. Yeah, I mean, let's say, well, I think before, like, we had to plan a little bit, let's say, in terms of the structure, and well, in terms of, let's say money, I don't think it's been, let's say, that much, but the main costs have been probably, the server, a domain, and also, I mean, we had to invest in some equipment, basically, a microphone, an audio interface, and also, let's say, people who help us editing stuff. But yeah, I don't know if you'd like to add anything else, Daniel.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the costs, I would say they were quite minimal. And I think the fact that they were being divided between the two of us, that also made it manageable. And I think that the two of us were also in a position that we have some free time, that we could do a project like this. I think that you could probably do it on your own. It might be a little more challenging managing everything. Yeah, I mean, so I think it's hard to say, an exact amount of money that we've done. I mean, I haven't really kept track of it or anything. We've just paid money as we've needed to.
Yeah, but I wouldn't say, let's say it's that much. So I think it would depend on what you would like to have. If you would like to have a website, or if you would like to have, for example, Spotify, have to pay for that. But it will, for example, if you want to have, let's say, really good sound quality, you will have to invest, let's say, on equipment a little bit. Maybe, I don't know, you will have to buy a microphone, or you will need to buy, let's say, a headset or something like that, let's say,
Mhm.
to make your work, let's say, easier. But let's say, it doesn't have to be, let's say, that difficult. But but in my experience also, let's say, and also probably in Daniel's, sound quality is really important.
Yeah.
And of course, maybe more than sometimes the video, because if you hear, maybe if it's too noisy, if the background is not, or it sound, let's say, needs to be really edited. So I think that's also a lot of work for the audio engineer or the sound engineer.
Definitely, definitely. Yeah, I agree with that about the sound quality, that is a key element.
Thank you.
Mhm. You're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Margarita, for joining the conversation and asking a question, because you're representing a very similar question on Facebook as well. So someone who was watching you guys on Facebook had a very similar question as Margarita. So thank you for that. Is there anyone else who would like to join in the conversation, guys? No? So could I use this moment of awkward silence just to ask you guys a question?
Sure.
As a colleague, I was wondering, like, I could see that some of the topics that you used for your episodes were quite current, like, so they were like related to whatever was going on at the moment, like the Black Lives Matter movement, George Floyd incident, and I don't know, estallido social. But I was wondering, some of them, sometimes we have like quieter times, right? So how do you select, how do you choose what to talk about in your episodes? Do you guys have like, what's the criteria to choosing the topic? I'm
That's a very good
curious.
question. I think, yeah, I mean, sometimes, like, I think Daniel was, sometimes we would say, like, okay, so what can we talk about in our next episode? It's just basically a conversation. I think it's a mixture of what's happening around the world, and also of maybe sometimes like the challenges that we're facing ourselves,
Yeah.
when sometimes you're like, oh, so, I'm teaching this, and like, for example, I remember the time when, everybody complained about students, not participating so much. And I think that was happening to me, and that was happening to everybody. So we were, let's say, trying to find, like, what people were doing. So we were doing some research. And from that, let's say, we went to, for example, teaching pronunciation, because we were teaching online. And also let's say, I think for me, it was a mixture of those things, like conversations, and also things that we were actually struggling with ourselves.
Yeah. And I think one thing that we did also do in the beginning was we created a list of possible
Yeah.
topics. And then that way we kind of had it in our mind and we could think about them. And then, when things came up, I said, I've been really thinking a lot about this. And I think that
Yeah.
this would be a good topic for our next episode.
Yes.
But then, like the pandemic happened, George Floyd. And I mean, it's like, you can't ignore those issues, they're
Yeah.
so timely, that those then became, a priority,
Yeah.
for our topics. So
And also, let's say, basically, I remember, like, our experience, we wanted to know, like, I started asking Daniel. Daniel was, we were talking about, class time, like how long should a lesson be, like 30 minutes, 1 hour. And then what about your experience? We're starting asking our colleagues, and then it's like, okay, let's talk about that then, because we would really like to find out.
Great, nice, lovely, lovely. Thank you, guys.
Thank you for your question, Barbara, and thank you.
No, I was really curious.
thank you.
I don't want people to think that we were planning this. No, that was not. Because they were really interesting. Some of the chapters, my favorite is the one on pronunciation. So, guys,
Thank you.
is there anyone else who would like to join in the conversation, maybe with a question or a comment?
I have a question.
Okay.
I would like to know, what are the future directions of ELT in Chile? Is there anything that is a challenge to you for the future? Is there anywhere that you want to take your podcast? Or maybe you can share with us what you have in mind for the next episode, so you can tingle our minds to get us to listen to you.
We have so many secrets, but yeah, I mean, I think, well, there are 2 episodes that are going to be published very soon. We interviewed a teacher from Ukraine, Maria. So we're working on that episode. So it's also, let's say, she just published a book. And, also, I think it's going to be important for us to, I think this is a conversation that Daniel and I that we've been having, like, teaching English in Chile. I mean, that's the name of the podcast, of course, but I think it goes beyond that. I mean, that's why we started. We would like to maybe have some more people from, let's say, other countries, because we've come to the realization that, let's say, these types of problems are basically the same everywhere.
Hmm. Yeah. And I mean, I think that, we were quite thrown for a loop, between the Estadio Social, with the pandemic, that, it isn't really just about Chile anymore. We're all facing these challenges.
Yeah, and I would say, well, I would dare to say that, let's say, the format, let's say video episodes, so like what you're doing right now, we're interviewing people. That's something I think that we would like to do. I mean, that's something that we enjoy, and also hearing from other people. And and also, like, one of the challenges that we, let's say, that was in one of the questions, trying to organize schedules, and also, let's say, trying to find people who are willing to participate. I mean, most people, let's say, they have a good disposition to participate, and also understanding that this is recorded, and let's say, I don't know if everybody would like to be, let's say, on camera or would be publicly available, but that's something that I would love to continue doing, like interviewing people. That's something that, especially like video episodes.
Excellent. Thank you, you guys.
Thank you.
Maybe we can take just one more question if someone wants to jump in.
Yes, I want to ask another question. I am curious to know if you have made a podcast on George Floyd.
Yes, we do have an episode where we did talk about what happened in the United States. We do talk about racism and things like that, the power of language. So if you go to the website, which we'll show you, you'll be able to see where we do talk about that.
Yes, and also, let's say, besides the episode where we talk about that, there are many resources, we share, some, let's say, really interesting, let's say, ideas, and also, let's say, documents that you can take a look at if you would like. So I don't know, Danny, if you would like to go to the next slide where, let's say, people can see our information.
Sure. Yeah. So here we have our information, www.eltinchile.com. Here's our email, podcast@eltinchile.com. And what I can do at this moment is I'll go ahead and pull up the website. So you'll need to let me know if you see this or not. So are you seeing the website now?
No, because you have to stop sharing and then share your screen.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. All right. Let's go ahead and do that one more time. Here we are. So as you see here, this is our latest episode on the homepage, and you see the most recent ones, right? And so under episodes here, we have the episodes, and then let's see if we can find the one that we were talking about with racism and the power of language. So that is probably on this page here. Let's see. Yes. Yeah, so we have 16 and 15. So here you can go ahead, you can listen directly on the website. And then here we have the show notes. So Oprah had a podcast talking about the situation. So 13th is from, I believe that's on Netflix.
Netflix show, yeah.
And so here we have all these things.
And some of them, it says like they're in English and in Espanol, so you can find them in both languages if you would like to use them in class, for example.
Yeah. And so here we have a TED Talk about it. We have, a talk at Google.
Yeah.
So we have this episode and then the previous one talking about racism and other current events in the classroom. And so here we also have a lot of resources here, talking about microaggressions, Eye of the Storm, Jane Elliott. This is a really, really interesting resource. She's a really interesting person. So, and then here we have some movies that students can watch, that will bring up these issues. So, yeah, so it's all here on our website.
So we really, let's say, that's why we wanted to share the show notes, because let's say that's where we share the resources that we talk about or that we share, let's say, during our episode. So that's why check them out if you have a chance, because there are many. They're, let's say, yeah, they're free. So that's one of the main missions, right?
Excellent. Thank you for your question, Margarita.
Thank you. Will you please show your website?
Yes. So this
Maybe
is
you
it
can
here.
copy and paste the link and paste it on the
Yeah,
chat.
sure.
So
Yeah,
everyone
I can do
have
that.
Sure.
I can do that. I can do that. No problem.
Okay, perfect.
So there you are.
Excellent.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
For the question.
Great. Thank you, guys. Yeah, so I hope everyone enjoys the website with the resources that were pretty cool. And yeah, we would like to maybe start closing the ceremony. I mean, this webinar. Really nice.
This graduation ceremony.
No closing ceremony. It's the Olympics, okay? I got All right, guys. So, well, thank you very much for sharing this with us. I think it was a great, it's an experience from our teaching community that is always worth getting to know. And it's fantastic to see how, teachers just like us, you guys are able to do this from scratch. And I think that's inspiring. And I really hope that some of the people who are watching might be motivated and encouraged to maybe carry out something similar. I hope you guys are inspired by it. You can see the guys are not necessarily TV people or.
Yes.
Well, we're very handsome, but that's something else. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah. Well, and we do have to put some differences aside. I was trying to get it to work with Mentimeter to settle our dispute about pineapple on pizza. Unfortunately, we weren't able to figure out that technology, but maybe that should be another conversation for another webinar.
Absolutely. And
you can always leave that poll under the recorded version of this webinar on our Facebook.
There we go.
There we go. Yeah, very good. Very good.
Also, I would like to thank everyone who attended and are joining us today, and invite you guys to our YouTube channel, TESOL Chile, where you can also find work from Daniel and from Jose Luis in their everyday teaching, training, and teaching life. So you can get that.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Thank you very much for the invitation, Barbara.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, absolutely. And also, yes. And also I would just let's say if somebody has a question related to maybe, I don't know, the podcast, you can send us an email as well, maybe something more technical or something like that. We'll be happy to answer those questions. So yeah, thank you, Barbara, for the invitation.
Thank you, guys. So we would like to say thank you all for coming. Thank you for joining us. We will have another very interesting webinar in the month of August as well. We will be contacting you. So if you haven't reached us, make sure to follow our social media, and so that we can, you can be keep yourself posted on all the things we are doing for you guys. And if you have ideas, we are also open to hearing those. Thank you, Daniel and Jose Luis. Thank you, everybody, for coming, for joining, and for participating with your questions and comments. And we will see you guys in our next webinar. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you, Carla. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.